Good afternoon. West Coast is good morning. So if you're on the morning part of this live stream, thanks for joining me here on the West Coast. All right. Just trying to kill some time here for a few minutes as we get some people up into the live stream. Wanted to talk about domestic manufacturers here in the United States. And I think this is probably one of the most hot topic, political environment type of discussions that you can get into is how to bring manufacturing back to the United States, because manufacturing jobs are like the good paying jobs. These are the ones that everybody would look for as far as if you don't have a lot of education, you can go get a manufacturing job that would pay well. And at least this was kind of the consideration there for a very long time. Of course, nowadays, if you want to be part of the manufacturing industry, you're going to have engineering degrees and stuff like that. But it still doesn't take away from the fact that manufacturers are not doing well here in the United States. It's a struggle to operate here. And really, if you take this back down to the Cantillon essay, which this is what I'm going to be reading from, the Cantillon essay. You can buy this book from Amazon. I left a link down in the description for the associate sales. You don't have to purchase the book. The book can be pretty much, you can get the entire PDF from the Mises Institute. So just type in Cantillon essay on economic theory, and you can find the Mises Institute, and you can get a free PDF file to it. However, you can also support the Uneducated Economist by going and purchasing this book, and I left a link down in the description for that. But this is really important to understand, because I think Cantillon describes it so well in his essay, and I'm going to read from this and then we'll kind of discuss a little bit of it. We have seen that the quantity of money circulating in a state may be increased by working its mines, by subsidies from foreign powers, by the immigration of foreign families, by the residence of ambassadors and travelers, but above all, by the regular and annual balance of trade. Now, this is really important to understand, because this is really the condition that the United States was in back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. We were the manufacturing powerhouse, and by producing the world's greatest stuff, we were sending out all these wonderful products, and they were sending us their money, right? And that's essentially what he is saying, is that, you get the greatest by the regular and annual balance of trade, from supplying goods to foreigners, and by receiving from them at least part of the price in gold and silver. Now, of course, we don't use gold and silver today, but back in the 50s and 60s, we did. Right? It is by this last means that a state grows most substantially, right? By this balance of trade, and by bringing in all this new money, by exporting all the good stuff, especially when its trade is accompanied and supported by ample shipping and by significant output of raw materials necessary for the production of exported manufactured goods. This is the exact condition that the United States was in, and then things changed. However, right, the continuation of this commerce gradually introduces a great abundance of money, right, and little by little increases consumption. For foreign products must be imported to meet this demand, and must be paid for by the reduction of the annual balance of trade. Think about that, right? When the United States was manufacturing all this stuff, sending it out there to the world was sending us their money. We started increasing our standard of living, right? Little by little, increasing consumption. Remember, this was written hundreds of years ago, right? Describes it almost perfectly. Foreign products must be imported to meet the demand and must be paid for by a reduction of in the annual balance of trade. So when you hear all this political talk about how they're sending our good manufacturing jobs overseas, it's all out of greed. No, it's part of the Cantillon effect. This is an economic theory, an economic force that was talked about hundreds of years ago, right? So you can blame it on a political force, right? Because, there's a lot to blame to throw around. But when you can describe it almost to a T, right, from this essay, then you know that there's more to it than just a political environment. All right. On the other hand, increased expenditures increase the cost of labor and the price of manufactured goods. It often happens that some foreign countries try to set up the same kinds of factories for themselves, in which case they stop buying those of the state in question. Right? They started manufacturing their own stuff and stopped buying it from the United States. Although these newly established factories and manufacturers are not perfect at first, right? Cheap Chinese crap, who wants to buy that? American made is so much better. Right? At first, they reduce and even prevent the export of those goods from the neighboring state into their own country, meaning that if they're making it for themselves, they're not going to buy it from us, where they can be acquired at a better price, right? So, and if you continue reading on from this, I'm not going to continue reading, but eventually he talks about how the foreign production comes in and it ruins the state and everybody falls into poverty. But this is really important to understand, because if you don't take into consideration the economic forces that were described hundreds of years ago that talk about driving the domestic manufacturers out while bringing ever increasing amounts of foreign production in, if you just totally throw that out, then there is no other excuse than it's a political environment. It's all about greed. It's all about, this messed up system. But yet it can be described perfectly from hundreds of years ago. So anyway, I wanted to bring this up, show some links down in the description that describe very much the issues that are taking place with the domestic manufacturers here. I mean, just take into consider semiconductors. Here, the United States is trying to subsidize and tariff and all kinds of stuff to try and bring a domestic manufacturer of semiconductors to the market. But they can't compete. There's no way they can compete, right? Even if they were to build awesome semiconductors that were better than everybody else, the amount that is being produced outside of the United States and the quality of them is enough to prevent the United States from being a competitor, right? It just can't happen. And so the only way that we're going to be able to be a competitor is through tariffs, which is not going to make it competitive in the United States, as that is just added cost to the consumer, right? Or it's going to come from subsidies, which again is going to cost the people of the United States through taxes. So there's no competition that can be had once the United States has elevated that standard of living. We are stuck with foreign production at that point. As soon as the new money turns off, we all start falling into poverty because we're not manufacturing enough to deal with the amount of consumption that we actually consume. All right, 105 people, 23 people watching. We were 7 minutes into it. There's probably plenty of questions to ask on this particular one, or a lot of statements. 105 people, 24 likes. Let's go hit that like button as soon as you get into the live stream. That'll pick up, the algorithm will pick up the video and start sending it around for more people to watch. All right, I love the Cantillon subject. I do too, Johnny. Thank you so much for the thumbs up there. Colin 8 on the dice. How you doing there all night? It's great to see you. Hey, Yui, how work today? Work is really slow, guys. I mean, it's starting to pick up a little bit because the weather is a little bit nicer, but it's still, it's March and it's, rainy and cold here in the Pacific Northwest. But things are getting a little better. I'm starting to pick up a few more special orders, a few more doors and windows. Windows have come down in lead time. Holy moly, I can get a window in 2 weeks now. That's pretty good considering they were almost 60 days out or more at one time. So, the availability of goods is definitely, coming up quicker. There's not so much lead times as going on with that. Price of lumber kind of ticking up a little bit, not too crazy yet, but I would anticipate that as we move into the summer, we're going to start seeing lumber prices moving up. So, but work is really slow right now. All right, $2 from Gone Viral. Thank you so much for the $2. Better info than these Fed idiots. Thanks. Well, I appreciate that. I tried to, I try to look at this stuff objectively. There's a lot of people who, are trying to convince you to buy their product or, their system or whatever it is that they got going on out there. And I will have a product to sell at some point. I do intend on putting together a course. But ultimately, I have nothing to really sell. Like, I'm just trying to look at this stuff objectively for what it is to try and position myself as best I can, Like, I don't, pump out, information that says, hey, this is where you need to throw your money towards. I don't know. I don't know who you are, and I don't know what it is that you need in your life. I know what it is that I'm doing, and I can tell you right now, cryptocurrencies are a lot of fun to be in possession of. Well, possession, right? To have, to have access to. I don't know if it's actually possession, when you can't physically hold it. But it's really fun watching the crypto market roll. And, really, I done quite well with my Coinbase stock. I dollar cost averaged most of last year, about $900 into it. And now that stock is up like 250% or something since since the last purchase that I made on it. So Coinbase is doing quite well for me. Whether or not you can trust it, I don't know, but that's just the position that I've taken, and I thought I'd just kind of, throw that out there for anybody who was curious. All right, the natural rate comes down. If the natural rate comes down, the neutral rate, will inflation continue to rise? I think so if you think about the neutral interest rate, if we were if we were sitting neutral, where the Fed is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, then we would be like, that's the neutral rate, right? So if the Fed is above the neutral rate, then what ends up happening is it's restrictive to the economy. Now, the Fed can stay still, and if the neutral rate falls, right, that is more restriction within the economy. I would assume that would not be inflationary. That would be disinflationary, right? And I mean, at least if the neutral rate falls. Now, there's no way of telling if the neutral rate is going to fall or rise. Pretty much the neutral interest rate goes off of inflation expectation of what the people think of in the future, considering what's going on today. Now, that can change, with just, narrative changes and stuff like that, economic shocks or whatever. But if people feel that inflation is going to be continuing going into the future, I would only assume that would cause the neutral interest rate to rise. And if the Fed stays still, that will be less restriction on the economy, and that rising of the neutral interest rate will actually cause an inflationary type aspect to it. Now, whether it actually creates an inflationary scenario, it would be more inflationary than if it was moving the other way, which would be more disinflationary. Did I say all that right? Okay. Thanks for the $2 too. I really appreciate it, man. Okay. Let me cruise down here to the bottom. I'm sorry if I'm skipping over a lot of comments. We have a lot of comments that comes in. I just want to be really close to the current one here. All right. Trump put tariffs on Canadian lumber back in 2018. They're still in effect. Yeah, but that's not okay. That's a little it's a little disingenuous. Yes, he did. So did Biden. So did all these other presidents going all the way back. I mean, tariffs on Canadian lumber is something that has been talked about since the 80s, right? So it's not like Trump did that, right? I mean, it was, yeah, sure, Trump did it, Biden did it, other administrations have done it. It's a very prevalent thing within the lumber industry between the United States and Canada. Canada produces an insane amount of lumber, way more than they can consume, right? So they have to export that stuff, and there's laws that keep them from dumping it into the United States, these anti-dumping laws and stuff. So that's really where the Canadian tariffs are put in place. But again, this is like a battle that's been going back into the 80s. In fact, I think it was into the early 80s. But yes, you're right, Trump did do that, and so did other presidents. So, I mean, to call him out specifically on that is not exactly genuine. Do you think gold or oil or commodities will go up if the Fed was to cut in June? I think yes. If the Fed was to cut in June, minus an economic shock, right? If there's an economic shock that has taken place, some financial crisis, another whatever, right? Whatever, black swan event or something that happens. If that was to take place, then yeah, all bets be different, right? Then all bets be off. But as far as just gradually lowering interest rates with no real reason behind it other than trying to keep the economy in a more or a less restrictive position, if that's kind of the idea behind it all, not lowering them because of an economic shock, I think that's going to put the perception in the people that says, hey, we need to move into safer assets. All right. The Fed doesn't typically lower interest rates unless there's some kind of economic damage happening. Right. And if there's no excuse for it, then the people are going to have to assume that there must be some sort of risk out there. And I would think that would actually get people into the risk assets, the things to try and protect them. So yeah, Bitcoin, silver, gold, things like that probably would do well. However, if there's an economic shock, I would think a little bit differently on that, depending on how that economic shock is. If it's a war that's breaking out, if it's another pandemic, if it's some kind of financial crisis, depending on what that economic shock is, would then determine whether or not these commodities like oil and gold and silver and stuff like that would do better. It's the risk with no reason, right? That would get me to think about gold and silver again. Did I say all that right? I think I did. I think I got that out right. Okay, I remember that he put brutal aluminum tariffs on Canada as well. Um, I calls them way I sees them. Yeah. All right. Hit the like button, guys. Hey, dishes. It's great to see you here. All right. Done simple. All right. Do you think? Oh, we already did that one. Okay. Trump's. Been waiting 3 months for a callback on one job I'm supposedly hired at to start working. Nothing started. Looking elsewhere. Bummer. Is there any economy book you would suggest for us to read on top of the essay? Well, I don't recommend any books that I haven't read myself, right? So that makes it very difficult for me to suggest books outside of the Cantillon essay because it's really the only one that I've actually read extensively. I mean, other than that, I've read The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is a really excellent book for understanding the Federal Reserve or getting exposed to the Federal Reserve. I think there's a lot of stuff in that book that is, kind of leaning more towards like the New World Order kind of view of the Federal Reserve and doesn't really focus in as much on like the objective view of the monetary policy. I'm not trying to knock the book. It's a great book. I mean, in fact, if I hadn't read that book, I don't think I would be here today, right? That book was very instrumental. And I've met Gio Griffin personally. The dude is super cool. His wife is way cool. Patricia is super nice. And so I would suggest that book as well for exposing, like if you have no clue about the Federal Reserve whatsoever, excellent piece. Once you have read that book, then I think it's really important to go back in and start reading some of the like speeches on monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve, stuff like John Williams' speech, monetary policy for a low neutral interest rate world. Once you start reading those things, it starts making a whole lot more sense on why the monetary policy is the way it is. Now, a lot of people will look at like monetary policy, look at the Federal Reserve, and look at politics and say this is the reason why these things are happening. I have been very, like, in my opinion, very good at predicting a lot of the stuff that's happening from the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy. Am I perfect at it? No, nobody is, right? But I think I have it pretty well dialed in. And I never, ever, ever, ever include politics into it because the Federal Reserve doesn't include politics in their monetary policy. And I know a lot of people might disagree and argue and have all kinds of reasonings for it. I'm just saying, man, it's been years and years that I quit following politics and only followed the Federal Reserve and their monetary policies and, things that have to do with that. And I tell you, it's made it a lot more, it makes everything puts everything in a better light. I wouldn't say it makes sense because nothing makes sense, but it puts it in a much better light. Politics just absolutely confuse it so bad. It is so confusing when you look at it through a political view. And I tell you, I was very politically minded at one time in my life, like, back in, say, prior to the Great Financial Crisis. And going into the Great Financial Crisis, I was incredibly politically minded, and I had all kinds of blame that I would point the finger at and all kinds of stuff. And guess what? My life failed, right? Once I got all that out of my life, I said, okay, that's it. I'm not looking at it. I'm not diving into conspiracy theories. I don't care about the politics out of it anymore. Only thing I'm going to do is follow the money. That's it. Just follow the money. And man, did my life change around and start getting better, right? Politics will confuse it. They do not help you understand economics. And I know that's maybe like heartbreaking for a lot of people who just love politics because it's a lot of things to really enjoy about it. But it doesn't make sense to me. Like politics and economics, two completely separate things. At least politics and monetary policy is what I should get. Fiscal policy into the economy is a much different thing. Looking at fiscal policy, which is the government's actions like the stimulus packages, the debt, all that other stuff, that is very impactful in the economy, but not to me personally when it comes to monetary policy. Monetary policy, I believe I have more choice in what it is that I can do with my life by understanding monetary policy. I have very little choice in my life on what I can do when I'm trying to understand fiscal policy because it doesn't make any sense. Right? Nothing coming from the government is logic, Nothing like is relatable. Nothing is accurate. Like none of it. Like it's just a complete chaos, you know. And not saying that monetary policy isn't, but at least from monetary policy, I can look at it in a way that I can now conduct myself in a better fashion. I know how to invest better. I know how to like, save better. I know how to business better, like all that other stuff. Politics ruins that for me. All right, moving on. All right. Politics is mostly just an excuse for fiscal policy. It really is. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And if you can look at the two policies different, like fiscal policy and monetary policies, they're very different from each other. And once you kind of separate them, then it makes it a lot easier to see the monetary policy. I'm not saying that fiscal policy doesn't have impact. It does, right? I mean, it's obvious, like with some of the things that they do, it's like there's no way that it can't be. But the monetary policy is so much more important to your individual choices, right? I mean, what is fiscal policy going to do other than try and get you to vote in a particular way, right? Did you listen to the recent Powell hearing? Someone asked about the average inflation targeting, and he basically said that they are back to just 2% target since the inflation went too high. Yeah, I think that if he was to explain average inflation rate the way that they are truly looking at it, that people would lose their crap, right? They would not understand anything that's going on. All of a sudden, there would be all this whole new narrative to it. They will never explain average inflation rate to the people in a way that they would truly understand it, because if they did, it would fail. Like they can't do it that way, right? I mean, they simply can't. They have to have the people's perception of this 2% target so that they can maintain the inflation expectation in the fashion that they are hoping for, right? I mean, the 2% average inflation rate over time is more about like making sure that you can communicate the inflation expectation in a way that can actually achieve that goal, right? But if they were explaining, hey, we're going for this 2% average inflation rate over time, that which means that at sometimes we would have to have inflation running extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time, people would take that into consideration and start pricing that in to their investments, into the market. Like the market would price that in. Right? They can't do that, right? They have to tell them, no, there's a 2% target. That way the market will price in that 2% target inflation rate, which would then create the average that they are looking for. But if they told them, hey, we're going to go for a little bit over 2% for a while, the market would price that in, and then it would create that issue to start taking place. I know that's really confusing. Like, the average inflation thing is so hard to wrap your head around. I mean, it took me like 7 speeches and a couple of years to figure it out, right? So, all righty. Good morning, Simon. Good morning, Brody. All right. Communist Manifesto, I actually like reading as an economic book. Yeah, I could see why. That's like, I mean, because I haven't read that book myself, but I know some of the things that are in it. And when you recognize the things that they are looking to do in order to bring communism in, and then you see it actually happening out there, it's just this is taking place, right? And to me, like, it ain't no question about it. Really, the United States and the idea of like a free market capitalist society and stuff like that was sent to like that was thrown in the garbage a long time ago, right? I mean, back in like the 30s, even before that, like even the Federal Reserve, the creation of the Federal Reserve, that was it. It was over, and so there was no more free market capitalism for the last 100 years or more, 120 years, right? It's crony capitalism, which is very different from letting people rise and fall on their own merits. When you are too big to fail, when you are systemically important, right, you all of a sudden get to carry yourself in a way that typically most people would never be able to do because they would fail, right? But since you're systemically important or too big to fail or whatever, they're buddies, you get bailed out. That isn't something that should happen in a free market capitalist society, right? And so I love it when I hear people say, oh, capitalism at its finest, capitalism ruins everything, capitalism, all this stuff. And I'm thinking, where did you ever find capitalism? I don't see it. I mean, I haven't seen it my entire life. I mean, I see crony capitalism, and I see where people go like, oh no, this is so important. We have to keep the system going. So we got to bail these things out, which is a total socialist thing, right? A communistic thing. You know, this is what people are begging for. And then they want to go and blame capitalism when they see greed and frustration out there. You know, it's just like, it doesn't make any sense to me. All nighter. Hi there. You seem peppy. All right. It actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I bet it does. All right. I'm making good headway on my property repairs. Well, good for you, man. That's awesome to hear. Exciting news, too. For the Cantillon essay, there's also an audio version on YouTube. Oh, well, that would be nice. Yeah, for those who like to listen to those audiobooks, I've tried listening to audiobooks, and I it's just not the same for me. Like, I can do good for about maybe 15 minutes or so, but then something will be said in the book, and I'll start to daydream about whatever it is that they said, and then I realize I wasn't listening, you know. All right. What do we got here? Good afternoon from Kenosha. Right on. It's great to see you, Tommy. Let me cruise back up here and see if there's another BTC at all-time highs. It's cool, right? Gold's gone up in a good amount since I started saving with it. Good for you. That's a good feeling to have, you know, because like I've bought in silver and gold, and then the price went down, you know, and it took a long time for it to get back. I mean, even now my position that I have in silver is probably still less than what I had paid for it, like if I was to sell it off today. But it doesn't matter to me because it's well worth the insurance that I feel I have from that. Having something outside of that third party, having something that's in my own possession, something that's in my hand, that gives me a security level that allows me to sleep at night. You know, I mean, most of the time you have to wait for like, or you're anticipating like an envelope in the mail or a phone call or your app working in order to see where your wealth is. And there's really nothing quite like silver and gold to get out of that third party claim like that. All right. If they would explain it, which means that a certain times we would have to have inflation running extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time, people would price that in. Yes, they would. They would absolutely price that in, and then the whole idea would absolutely fail. He is very cautious. All the Fed governors, all the Fed speak, listen to it. Listen, like, when they add that word, inflation over time, that is them basically saying average inflation rate. They're like, they wouldn't say over time. They would say target, right? 2% target once we have achieved our target, but they say 2% over time. And that way they can keep the people's perception that it's a target while maintaining the truth of it. I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's like a gaslighting thing, but you know, really, they say, hey, we said it was going to be 2% over time. We didn't explain what over time meant, right? You had to go and research that for yourself to understand what the over time part meant, and that's where the average inflation rate really comes in. All right. I'm honestly tempted to save that clip and use it as a ringtone. That would be funny. You don't want journalists push back on target over time. That's right. Yeah, you don't want them to ever, like, that's, I mean, think about the 60 Minutes interview, right? The interviewer just like straight up called him out on it. You are going to lower interest rates once you reach the target, right? And he said, no, that's not what we're saying. We're going for a 2% over time, right? He straight up says, no, we are not going for this target. Like, he told the 60-minute interview straight up, we are not going for a target. We are going for a 2% over time. And then, like, what does that mean? Like, you know, nobody explained that. Everybody was just like, okay. So it's a 2% target, right? You know, I mean, this is what everybody ended up assuming. And that, again, like, people thought that they had failed in the sense that they'd taken longer to get to their 2% that they were anticipating. Well, maybe to get the inflation to that 2% mark. But I don't think that they have missed the mark when it comes to having that average inflation rate over time, or fixing their main problem with an inflation expectation that was persistently too low. Because that's exactly what John Williams said in this speech here, that today we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate, that is the short-term real interest rate that is consistent with an economy operating at its potential alongside low and stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. Straight from the Federal Reserve itself, from November of 2018, right? This is the problems. This is the problem they needed to solve, and they are totally fixing it right now. And as long as they can maintain that narrative, I think that they are going to be able to continue to conduct their monetary policy in the way that they are hoping to. All right. Excuse me, I'm a couple of minutes behind. No problem, Brody. All hail the fellowship. Oh, I'm late. Hey, Raven, it's great to see you. All right. Is the new transitory? I think one of the biggest problems is that we are a nation, have been sold a story that we need so much stuff, so we strive to buy. It's overconsumption, only works until it doesn't. Well, I mean, is that the case? I mean, is it like, were we pushed to buy all this stuff? I mean, really, you go out and buy stuff that you like. Did you like, I mean, do you have any luxury items at all? I mean, save like the only way that this could have been prevented, this whole scenario, considering that it was described hundreds of years ago, the only way that it could have been prevented is to recognize that the new money was coming in, to purposefully not increase your standard of living. Do not enjoy new products. Do not enjoy higher, like no clothing, no new houses, no new cars, none of that stuff. Consume only the bare minimums of what it is. Take all that extra money beyond what it is that is for your survival, and you reinvest that back into the production here in the United States. If we were to maintain some kind of scenario like that, okay, like we might have been able to prevent something, right? I mean, I still even doubt that, but maybe. Right? But that's not what happens. Like, just think about it, you personally. Like, everybody is going to do this. This is human nature. This is something that you can't prevent. But just imagine for just a second that you have a new job, right? And that new job is now paying you a hell of a lot more. It's paying you, like, you went from making $10,000 a month to making, $25,000 a month, right? You got a crap load more new money coming in. And so with your new money coming in, you're going to want to enjoy it, right? I mean, that's just all there is to it. There's like, you can't say like, oh man, I worked real damn hard, finally got my skills together, finally got my education to the point, finally got like, the respect that I was looking for and needed in order to achieve this higher level of pay that I am now getting. And I'm not going to enjoy that. Like, does that sound reasonable? And no, not at all, right? Everybody's going to do the same thing. They're going to go get nicer clothes, a new car, a nicer house, and 2 ribeyes, right? I mean, this is it's just going to happen that way. There's nothing you can do. And so it isn't a matter of being forced into consumption. It's not a matter of greed, because it is greed, it is consumption, it is all those things out there, but it's also human nature to do that. Like, how do you get people to not be a human? Like, this is the way it goes. It's just the way it's going to happen. Taking a conscious effort towards it to prevent it from taking place is very communistic in mind, right? Socialist in mind, right? No, you can't, you can't buy this stuff. You can't, you're limited. You're all this other stuff, right? But that's not the American way. Americans are about freedom of choice. And part of that choice is the ability to dive into luxuries when you have made a lot of money. And that is the exact thing that will actually be the downfall once the new money turns off. It's like, it's almost impossible to prevent it from taking place. It's better to recognize it for what it is, and then not only mentally prepare yourself, but then physically and financially prepare yourself for it as well. Yeah. And now, whether or not the ultimate demise of like poverty and misery actually comes to us, or the next generation or the generation after that, or if they figure out a way to get the new money coming in and get the cash out and go into negative interest rates. I mean, who knows what the future is going to be, right? It's not a matter of like trying to prepare for like that poverty misery part of things. I mean, if you were preparing everything that you're doing for this ultimate like failure of the economy, of the United States, then you're probably going to be waiting for a while for an event that may not take place, right? It's better to position yourself for something like that to happen, maybe, right? Have that gold and silver, have that cryptocurrency, have the firearms, have the store of food, have a way to preserve food. Once you got all that, then go back into like dealing with the economy for what it is, right? You got your security, set that aside, you're done with that part of it, right? And now go in and look at the monetary policy, decide what it is that you need for your life, and then start conducting yourself accordingly, right? I mean, it's just like it's hard to describe in a 10-minute video, or just even, in videos in general. Like, there's no video out there that it could possibly tell you in just a few minutes what it is that you need to do with your life. I have a guy who constantly saying, dude, you're not giving out information. What is it that you're going to do with your money the day? Give me like step by step on how it is that I'm going to become a millionaire. And it's just like, right? Go chase excellence, man. That's the easiest way, go chase excellence and figure it out. I mean, it's not up to me to decide that. Like, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to become a millionaire myself from the position that I'm in. All right. What time is it? 5. Okay, I got 5 more minutes, guys, and we're going to call it quits. Do you think housing or grocery costs will go down or stay higher for longer? I don't see prices. Like, I would imagine a lot of prices are going to be coming down in certain things, but when it comes to like groceries, like what is it that, like, I mean, my wife is an incredibly good shopper, right? And so when I ask her, like, how much is our grocery bill gone up, she was like, well, it's gone up some, but I don't buy the same things, right? She adjusts what it is that she's buying. Things are on sale, she'll bulk up. When she's like, she is very, like, she doesn't buy the exact same products once every, like, it doesn't work like that. And if that was the case, then you would see prices moving up. But she just, like, she's very, like, nimble in the way that she is shopping for groceries, and she's really good at it. So, like, our grocery bill, although it has gone up, we just adjusted the way that we buy things, buy more bulk, buy things more on sale, and preserve those things when we do find it on sale. So we are active when it comes to positioning ourselves that way. Um, but as far as like, all right, I was just looking through some of these comments here. But that's ultimately like, the thing is, like, prices aren't going to necessarily come down to what you would have had expect, like, prior to the pandemic. Like, that's not going to be the case. Inflation and disinflation and deflation are all different things, right? Inflation is when prices are moving up. Disinflation is when they're moving up, but not as much, right? Deflation is when they actually go down. Stagflation is when, prices aren't moving and nobody's working. So, there's a lot of different, situations that are going to be taking place. So when you say, is the housing market going to come down? Yeah, in some areas it is. My area, it's not. Like, I think the prices that have come out of the housing market in my area are done. Like, there's no more coming down unless something major happens, right? But as far as the economic conditions and things that I see right now, my area this is as low as it's probably going to get. I would assume that in other areas of the country, you'd probably find some pretty good deals and house prices moving down. So as a whole, no, I don't see that happening. Still doing demo, okay. Do you think we already read that one. Okay. I've been cheap for too long. I'm going to Cuba on Tuesday. Found a decent all-inclusive for 1,200 Canadian. Right on. All right. How will prices come back down when supply is still very limited? Well, I mean, it depends on what supply it is that you're talking about. Like, lumber prices came down, so if you can find supply of things, then I would assume that you're probably going to start seeing some prices moving down. Solar panels, for one, like, just look at some of the links that I leave down in the description. It looks like there's going to be a flood of semiconductors and solar panels and all kinds of stuff like that. I could only assume that the foreign production of these things are just going to get incredibly low. California requires registration of all firearms soon, additional tax and tracking. All right. Hey, no one special. Love your videos. Powell said that they are close to cutting rates substantially. Do you think he was just job owning? Yeah. I think he's keeping that narrative. I mean, go and look at what Bowman just said. I mean, remember, Powell is one voting member of the FOMC. right? Just one of the voting members. He is the voice of the FOMC, but he is also the voice of the monetary policy to conduct and keep that narrative going. Look at what Michelle Bowman, just type Michelle Bowman, who is also very influential on the FOMC. We have covered a lot of speeches from that lady. She is incredibly intelligent when it comes to this. And what was she saying? She's saying that no, she might even see like a rate increase from here. And she just recently said this, right? So it's going to be very difficult to figure out what it is that the Federal Reserve is planning on doing by watching the news, right? The news is propaganda straight up. You got to go and read those speeches and make sure that we follow what it is that they are talking about within the speeches, because those things are so much more telling. Remember, those speeches that they give are not like I don't think they're necessarily intended for the public. Like, because the public, I rarely see anybody ever covering them or talking about them or anything. Like, I'm the only one who like is like adamant about constantly bringing them up. Those speeches are intended for the other bankers out there, right? That's something important to remember. So when they're communicating in those speeches, they're communicating with the other banks, the other bankers. When they're communicating on the mainstream, they're communicating with the narrative, with the propaganda, with the people out there to try and get them to conduct themselves in a particular way, right? There's a huge difference. That's why, like, you have to almost watch both of them at the same time in order to understand what the monetary policy is doing through the narrative, and then what it is that they are truly wanting through their speeches. Right? Mind blowing. All right, no cutting rates, blowing smoke. Afternoons, everyone. Well, afternoon, deja vu. All right. Guys, I gotta go. I'm sorry. My lunch is over. I would love to hang out here and keep talking monetary policy and love to talk about this manufacturing base leaving the United States. Or having trouble competing here in the United States. I think that's probably a better way to look at it. And through all the political views that I've heard of through people, statements, through everything that is out there, very, very, very rarely have I ever heard anybody bringing up the Cantillon effect when it comes to trying to reestablish manufacturing back here in the United States. It's going to be very difficult. All right, so thank you very much for joining today's live stream. I left a bunch of links down in the description for you guys. Thank you very much for the $2 super chat. That's very cool of you for the support. Left a link for the Cantillon essay that you can get off of Amazon. And one of the things that I found from the Amazon Associates link is that anything that you purchase after following that link, actually I get credit for. So for the next 24 hours after you have opened up that link, anything that you put into your shopping cart on Amazon, the Uneducated Economist will get support for that. All right. Or commissions anyway. Okay. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.